Can I share an example from an engineering company?
Absolutely.
Where this happened. So in one of my funded research projects, I worked with an engineering sales company, Australasian. So embedded, across Australia, New Zealand,
What's
up in
engineering,
Indonesia.
just to be of an idea?
They sold engineering parts and products and services. So ball bearings,
Okay.
mine shift, electronic shafts. They sold into mining industry, fast manufacturing, car industry when we had that in Australia.
When you say they sold, as in they create and sell, as in they create the product or they sell it?
They on-sold it, and they also added value by bringing different engineering
and maybe
products together and
somehow.
implementing solutions.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
And so in this organization, I was invited in because they had a problem. They had flatlined gross profit percent. So over a number of years, they couldn't shift their profit margins. Right? They tried all sorts of things. First, they jumped to training, love of learning. Let's send people on courses, on diplomas, on MBAs. And yes, that increased engagement, but didn't increase the bottom line.
Got it. Interesting.
I'm not advocating that always plays out. That was in this particular context. It didn't. They looked at, the marketing protocols, in their product catalogs, they looked at increasing, the gross profit percent on each item, right? And that didn't shift. And so when I came in, it was the organizational development director who was implementing a new way, a new quality of conversation. See, come back to what we were talking about before.
Yep.
And so they did a bit of an experiment. So when I came in, it was a business conglomerate of 27 businesses, right? And so there were a couple of large business units. There was one business unit where they didn't touch the teams. These engineering branches that were around Australasia. They just enabled the quality of the conversation to continue as it was. And then in another group, another business unit, they implemented different types of conversations where they were encouraging people to connect their best practices, not just in their branch, but, if you're in the mining industry, what's happening with all the other mining industry branches at the same time. So they engaged in sort of this prognostication, these ideas about, what's going to happen in our industry in 6 to 10 years time. And so it prioritized work differently. It wasn't just about rearranging products on the shelf. It wasn't about, we need to work longer hours. We need to have a shorter lunch break. It isn't, how we greet the customers when they come into the branches. It was very much thinking about, where's the direction of the mining industry or whatever industry was their customer base.
The macro conversation versus the micro thing.
Yep. And so,
that, to your point, Catherine, I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, but I can see from the engagement of that would be are engaged in long-term outlook and stuff. They feel out, they feel expected, they feel validated. That's when I talk about the qualification. When I say you have a seat at the table, that means whatever the heck I talk about, you can. I believe it's not relevant. I will acknowledge the point, move on quickly. I'll share the conversation in an effective way, but people can say what they say, and they feel really the engagement, I believe, very important. Because when you do a long hours as a developer, we only do long hours Monday to Thursday, actually 3 days a week, and out of the 5, and the others are half day, kind of start at midday or whatever else. So nevertheless, it's pretty heavy stuff. We pay people well, and people do really solid weeks, let's call them. Yeah, you do want to, in this conversation, maybe not talk about the actual just dev stuff. Maybe you want to talk about the company. Maybe you want to talk about IBM. Maybe you want to talk about Google. People feel, I'll let that conversation flow because they feel this is part of the vision, part of where the industry is going. I'll let that go. Sometimes for half an hour, you'd be talking nothing to do with the project directly. So I definitely connect with you. I can start to see why that was useful in that organization to engage in a long-term use of the industry. People feel creative. They feel also respected. I'm part of that conversation. I'm invited to talk about it. I'm validated. I'm respected.
And so it's thinking outside of the square. It's thinking, what's happening in other teams in our organization? How are they learning? How are our competitors learning? What can we do some, intelligence, on them, or what's happening outside of, what's happening in our suppliers or, in our customers' business? What are the problems on their horizons that we're going to need to solve next? And so by giving that bigger picture, it inspires that motivation and love for learning
100%.
and creates it as a collective conversation.
Yeah. And in terms of the impact on their bottom line, how did that?
Turned around. So slumping team performance had an upkick. And
So what's
there
the
was
mechanic there? Do you believe this kind of quality of the conversation, or this sort of, the type of conversations when it's shifted to look at the long views of the industry, of things around them, of where this is going, etc. How do you feel this kind of the flow effect to why it ended up impacting the bottom line? Can you unpack that a little bit? Did you guys do some? Clearly, you must have done some analysis on that.
Yeah. So the question we had was, who instigated these conversations, right? Was it their line managers or was it somebody different? And what was really neat about this work we did with the engineering organization is that they had a shift in the organizational structure. They changed the way they designed the organization to nudge these conversations. So, the branch managers were at their wits' end, just meeting the gross profit % targets to demanding customers on the line. My machine's broken down again. You got the wrong ball bearing again,
Yeah.
So, they were just trying to meet the everyday needs. And so what this company did differently was to embed a business development manager. Now, that sounds, a bit ad hoc, but they did it in a very systematic way. So there was like a hub of employees that worked across initially just Australia, but they had a region that oversaw, 3 to 8 branches with a similar customer base. And so their role was to instigate these conversations. And people go on holidays. And so the beauty of this hub was that although a business development manager was allocated to a group of branches, there was always, backups there,
Being a business development manager, just for me, if you don't mind, and perhaps the audience as well. So in terms of why that particular title, and I know maybe I should have let you finish in terms of what they did, but I can clearly start to see that they are engaged with their client base. Would that be the case? And then bring in maybe some of that knowledge and need and effect and feedback into that conversation for those folks, right?
Interesting. So, perhaps that title has role descriptions that go with it, right? So let me back up and just call it a support hub. So these people who had been in the business already, they weren't hired as a business development manager, so didn't, and their role was to share best practice amongst the branches, to get the teams to think outside of the square, to think about learning, from their customers, from the other branches, that love of learning, but not in the immediate to meet the deadlines. It's sort of like, well, my customers had this problem with the ball bearing now. They're on the phone shouting at me. But, what's the larger cause of this? Are there other mechanical issues that we can help them solve, that we can add value to that customer base? And so the beauty of this support hub was that the whole role or group of roles of supporting the branches was dedicated to learning, to encouraging this, understanding of the situation. And it was happening at the front line. It was hearing the problems of the customers and getting the branches to engage in that strategic conversation rather than, the directors sitting up in headquarters solving all the problems when they were 3 steps removed in a tall hierarchy. And so empowered people at the front line to think creatively, to expand their careers, to see how they could add value to the
Mm.
customers.